Telling Time. This is a DK reader written by Patricia J. Murphy. Here's a note to parents. Telling Time. This is our title page, and on this title page it has the title, the author, written by Patricia J. Murphy, and it also tells us the publishing company that published this book, DK Publishing. On this side over here on the left, it also tells us the date that it was copyrighted. Do you know what time it is? We tell time many times a day. When is soccer practice? What time is dinner? When does the party start? What time will you get there? We use clocks to tell time. They help people plan their day. People have been telling time for a long, long time. Clocks from long ago did not look like ours, and they did not keep the best time either. This is the story of how clocks have changed. Once upon a time, people woke up when the sun rose and went to bed when the moon and stars came out. These were the first clocks. Sometimes people used stone pillars to mark the movements of the sun, moon, and stars during the year. This is telling us that this picture is Stonehenge in England. If we look here on the bottom, we have a timeline. And the timeline, it just is starting out, it's showing that this is prehistoric times. They use the moon, the sun, and the stars. Timelines are an important part of letting us know when things happen. More than 5,500 years ago, ancient Egyptians watched shadows to tell time. They placed sticks called gnomons in the ground. They also built stone pillars called obelisks. And here's a caption saying what this picture is. It is an obelisk. These sticks and obelisks cast long shadows on the ground. As the sun moved, the direction of the shadows told people what part of the day it was. These devices were the very first sundials. And here we are, we're following this timeline. Of course, it's going to start out with prehistoric times, what we learned on the page before, and it's going to 3500 BCE, and it shows a picture of this obelisk or stone pillar that's being used to cast a shadow. I bet we can predict what every page is going to do, that it's going to build on this timeline. Let's see. You know what? My eye first went down to the timeline. I bet yours did too. The timeline, prehistoric times, the sun, the moon, and the stars. 3500 BCE, they had the obelisk or pillars to cast the shadow. 1500 BCE, we're going to learn something else of how they told the time. Let's go on to find out. In 1500 BCE, the Egyptians built an even better sundial. It was shaped like a T and had special markings. The markings split the day into 10 hours of daylight and 2 hours of twilight. Like all sundials, this one could only tell time in sunlight. People could not tell what time it was on cloudy days or at night. Here we have a cutout. Time for bed, tut. Around 600 BCE, Egyptians lined up merkits with the stars to tell the time at night. And here's our timeline is on the bottom that we talked about. So it's talking about that T. Starting in 1400 BCE, ancient Egyptians and Greeks used water clocks to tell time during the day and the night. Water was poured into a bowl with holes in it. As the water dripped out through the holes, people checked the water levels using special marks. This told how much time had passed. We have a cutout up here, and it shows a water clock tower. In 1088, Su Song, a Chinese monk, built an amazing water clock tower. It was more than 30 feet tall, or 9 meters, and had many moving parts. And here we have our timeline. Of course, we're going to start back at the prehistoric times, and they're reviewing that it has stars, moons, and the sun. 3500 BCE, what did they use? Obelisk. 1500 BCE, they measured the sun with the T-shaped instrument. And in 1400 BCE, they are using the water clocks. $700 years ago, big and heavy weight-driven clocks were invented. Many of these clocks had round faces and moving hands. After the weights were raised up, they would lower slowly to make the clocks work. The caption says, "Bells on this clock tower rang on the hour." 200 years later, clocks were made that were powered by springs instead of weights. They were small and light, and some were made to fit in pockets. These tiny timepieces were the first pocket watches. Let's read this caption. The outside and inside of a pocket watch. I'll let you look at the timeline and see how it's going. Let's go to the next page. Timelines are a good way, before I go on, timelines are a good way to check and to kind of put things, kind of order them in our minds. In 1582, Galileo Galilei noticed that an oil lamp swinging from a chain kept perfect time. He found that a swinging weight always took the same number of beats to go backward and forward. Another name for a swinging weight is a pendulum. In 1657, Christian Huygens invented a clock that used a pendulum to keep time. This cutout says the cuckoo clock. This pendulum clock makes a whistle that sounds like a cuckoo bird every hour. If it is 12 o'clock, it whistles 12 times. And here we have our timeline. They've added 1657, the pendulum, or it looks like a cuckoo clock. On the high seas, sailors needed to know the exact time to find their way. Pendulum clocks needed to stand still and would not work on choppy waters. In 1759, John Harrison invented the H4 chronometer, a special clock to use on ships. It worked so well that it won a prize from the British government. And here we have a label. They've labeled this the H4 chronometer. And here's a picture of John Harrison. And a cutout right here, it said sands of time. Sometimes sailors used hourglasses filled with sand or powdered eggshells to tell time. The powder would take 1 hour to flow from the top bulb to the bottom bulb. Clocks had problems on land too. Each town set its clocks using the sun. When the sun reached the highest place in the sky, it was 12 noon for that town. Since the sun reaches the highest place in the sky at different times, in different places, every town had its own 12 noon. Time was different all over the place. It was a mess. Now, they didn't add anything, did they? They just stayed with 1759. Many people thought it was silly for every town to have its own time. They asked questions like, how can railroads and mail coaches run on time? How can people meet for lunch or do business? How can we fix this problem? Sanford Fleming, a railroad worker, knew the answer. His idea was to divide the world into 24 time zones. Each zone was exactly 1 hour apart from its neighbor. Now time was the same for everyone in each zone. The cutout here says Greenwich Mean Time. Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, is the time in Greenwich, England. Each time zone was described by how many hours away from GMT it was. Now, our timeline, there's added a world, the Earth, and that's signifying that they got it into 24 time zones. In the 1800s, women were the first to wear wristwatches. After soldiers wore them in World War I, men liked to wear them as well. Later, watches with tiny quartz crystals inside would become the best timekeepers. The crystals moved like pendulums, but kept even better time. Quartz watches are still popular today. And we have these pictures are labeled. Quartz watch, quartz crystal. The cutout right here says digital quartz watches. In 1972, quartz watches went digital. A display of numbers appeared instead of a clock face. The timeline, they've added 1885 for quartz watches. Quartz watches no longer keep the most exact time. What does? Atomic clocks do. Atomic clocks use atoms, tiny particles too small for us to see, to help tell time. The atoms act like pendulums. They move backwards and forward, billions of times per second. This lets atomic clocks tell time to a billionth of a second. And here's a label. The first atomic clock and the modern atomic wristwatch. And 1949 is added to our timeline. So why do we need to tell time to a billionth of a second? Many forms of technology that we use today need the split-second time of an atomic clock to work. These pages show just a few examples. I'm going to start over here. Space travel, radio and television broadcasts, cell phones. Now what does this cutout say? Exact timekeeping. In 1999, scientists invented the world's most exact clock. It is called NIST F1. It will not gain or lose a second in millions of years. Incredible. Oops, forgot to read that part, that caption or whatever. Satellites. Today, clocks come in all shapes and sizes, colors, and styles. Some flash, make sounds, play music, or say the time out loud. Others time how fast you run. These timepieces are very different from the early sundials, obelisks, and water clocks, but one thing is the same. They help us plan our day so that we can be sure to always be on time. Timely facts. Long case clocks were built to hide their long pendulums. The song Grandfather's Clock, written in 1876, inspired people to call them grandfather clocks. The ancient Egyptians were the first people to divide the hour into 60 parts or minutes. Their number system was based on the number 60, which is easy to divide by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10. The world's smallest clock is an atomic clock the size of a grain of rice, created by the National Institute for Standards and Technology in Boulder, Colorado in 2004. The Colgate-Palmolive clock is one of the world's biggest clocks. It measures 55 feet around, 16.8 meters. It is located in Jersey City, New Jersey. It was built